and determined to testify. Now, on this question about the Mesopotamian War, everybody knows why they oppose it, don't they? Everyone's clear on what their reasons are. We were told wrong things. We were given inaccurate information by dubious governments. We were sort of cheated into a feeling that our delegations at the UN had overstated the matter of weapons of mass destruction and terrorism. In fact, when you think about it, you'll find that it's probably even wrong to mention Saddam Hussein in the same breath as weapons of mass destruction or terrorism. I have a couple of tests of my own for whether people know what they're talking about when they're talking about Iraq. Anyone who says that Saddam Hussein was, okay, a bad guy, doesn't know what they're talking about. You hear that said quite a lot. They don't know. They don't know what fascism feels like. They don't know what it's like to see families forced at gunpoint to applaud the torture and execution in public of their family members. They don't know what it's like to see 180,000 members of the Kurdish people, at a minimum, killed by poison gas in the northern provinces of Iraq. They don't know what it's like to see at least that number of Shia Arabs killed in southern Iraq. They don't know what it took, Anglo-American, British-American policy, to put a no-fly zone from 1991 onwards over those two zones to make sure that those two genocides could not be replicated. They don't know what it would be like to be a citizen of Kuwait or Iran, seeing Saddam Hussein's army coming over the horizon, attacking your civilians in that way, abolishing, in one case, the whole existence of a member state of the Arab League and of the the Islamic Conference and of the United Nations, abolishing it, annexing it, making it part of Iraq. They didn't hear the speech from Saddam Hussein saying the only mistake he ever made was that he invaded Kuwait before he'd finished the nuclear weapon. He should have done it the other way round. First get the nuclear weapon at the Tuwaitha reactor, which we found as a result of the Kuwait war when we weren't looking for it. Get the bomb first, then invade Kuwait, then ask them what they're going to do now that I've invaded it. Don't do it, don't get it the wrong way around. We lived at this man's permission for a long time. We lived by his warrant. Only his stupidity allowed us to be as complacent as we were. And in the meantime, fighters in northern and southern Iraq were fighting against a tyrant who we should have been fighting ourselves. The liberation of Iraq, in other words, the decision that we had to move the Iraqi people and the region into a post-Saddam era, will stand, I'm convinced, as one of the greatest decisions of American statecraft, as one of the things that American soldiers, male and female, and politicians who voted for it, those who've defended it, will be proudest of in the future of any decision we've ever made. Despite the ridicule, despite the incompetence, despite the failures, despite the disappointments, let us review what we've done. First, we have removed a keystone state of the Middle East from the control and sole ownership of a psychopathic crime family who owned all of Iraq and treated its people as if they were disposable citizens. I remind you that this keystone state occupies a choke point on the Gulf and an arterial carotid point in the world economy that cannot be left to the control of a fascistic mafia. I remind you further that it exists between the exorbitant Sunni Wahhabi theocracy of Saudi Arabia and the no less exorbitant Shia theocracy of Iran, that it is the keystone that allows us, yes us, we who have the right to do this, we who have the right to insist on oil, we who don't have to be ashamed of mentioning oil in the same breath as democracy, to say, if we can recuperate Iraq, if we can recuperate its oil industry, if we can stop it being the private property of a psychopathic crime family, we can not only help the Iraqis, but we can undercut the monopoly or the duopoly of Shia Iran and Wahhabi Saudi Arabia. Does anyone think this is a matter of indifference? Is anyone willing to get up and say, you, sir, very good for you. I admire your nerve. I wouldn't mind if you were the only one, as you seem to be. You're indifferent to it. The rest of us here, voters and consumers, all believers in freedom, might possibly want to take the view that it can't be for us a nothing question what happens to Iraq. We'll add, in the remaining time, that we have brought one of the great war criminals of the world to justice and put him and his crime family and his main complicit associates on trial in public in a country where, until recently, very recently, it was death, slow death, very slow death, to possess a cell phone or a satellite dish. That we have undone what UNESCO calls the greatest crime against the human ecology ever committed, the destruction of the marshes of southern Iraq, the oldest wetlands in the Middle East, the smoke and destruction of which could be seen from the space shuttle, so terrible was the environmental decay. That we have proclaimed the autonomy of the Kurdish people, the oldest and largest nation in the world not to have a state of their own, and that where they live in their federalized, democratized provinces in northern Iraq, which were released from Saddam Hussein's control a full 12 years before the liberation of the rest of the country, business flourishes, press flourishes, democracy flourishes, civil society flourishes. The sooner, the earlier the intervention by the British and American forces in Iraq, in other words, the happier, the sooner, the greater, the deeper, the more enduring, and the more useful in the future is the outcome. I'm willing to defend, because I've just seen time, I'm willing to defend and underline and repeat and restate and emphasize everything I have said so far. So all of you who've come here under the pathetic illusions peddled by Hillary Clinton, Harry Reid, and MoveOn.org have all your work still ahead of you. And you thought it was going to be easy, didn't you? Bye now.
Thank you, Christopher. Peter, the next 5 minutes are yours.
Thank you. The lesser breeds without the law were the Germans. It was the law that they were outside that made them lesser. I just thought I had to add that. Right, consequences of the Iraq War. $6 trillion, which the United States does not have, expended. Iraq, under the control largely of the Ayatollahs of Iran. The resorts to torture by the United States, often by proxy, but not always. Disgraces in themselves and disasters. An untold number of innocent people killed. The certainty that the United States is unable for the foreseeable future to mount a justified military operation abroad. The diminution of the moral authority of the Western democracies, again, for the foreseeable future. Fantastic. What more could you ask? Resulting from deliberate ignorance of the past, deliberate willful ignorance of the past, of Britain's own attempts to control and exploit and govern Iraq through fake parliaments and fake elections, at least more successful for a while in gaining the cooperation of at least one of the Iraqi factions without necessarily having to pay them to fight by the day with AK-47s against our enemies instead of against us. Again, triumph. I really do not see what justification there could be of the operation on its own merits. But if it is a principle that the United States has to intervene in every country which is misgoverned, where there are despots, where there is torture, where there is no freedom, then where else can anybody in this room think of that we might be intervening? For instance, the site of the Summer Olympics might occur to some, but we do not. nor if we're terribly tender about the massacres of Arabs by Arabs, or the citizens of Arab states by other Arab states. Why is it that we accepted as our allies in the first Gulf War the state of Syria, whose then president, Hafez al-Assad, ordered his troops with artillery to surround the town of Hama and shell it until everyone living in it was dead? If our principle is that we only associate with nice foreign regimes and we always attack and devastate nasty ones, where was that principle then? None of it makes sense. None of the objectives turned out to be true. When I was in Iraq for the first time, only a few weeks after the invasion, people crowded round me in Najaf and Kabul saying, and many of them spoke English, they said, "Thanks very much indeed for coming. Now will you please get out?" And that was the nicest thing that anybody said to me all the time. I was there. How can anyone stand here and say that this is a success? All I can say is that it must take the most enormous courage and resolution to continue to stick to an obviously losing argument.
Well, it's obviously come to the actuarial. Seems a waste of Hitchensism in a way to just reduce things to the balance sheet, but we do balance sheet, we'll do balance sheet properly. Let me suggest some things to you. First, everybody knows that there isn't a single clever person here who doesn't know, is there, or watching this on a webcast, who doesn't know that you can't mention weapons of mass destruction and Saddam in the same breath, even though he used them against Iran and against the Kurds, wrongly described as his own people within the borders of his own country, and was continuing to incubate and maintain the capacity to recover them. However, for actuarial purposes, let me just say that having enforced the resolutions that governed this question in the case of Iraq, we forced the capitulation of Colonel Gaddafi, whose stock of WMD we had underestimated. When he came in, and he didn't surrender, I might add, to Kofi Annan or Jacques Chirac. Where did Colonel Gaddafi come a few weeks after the fall of Baghdad to say, okay, you can take all my stockpile now and put it in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where it now is, which is where it should have been? He didn't come to Kofi Annan. Hold your applause, comrades. I know I'm never going to get any from a... but thanks for trying. I sort of appreciate it. He didn't come to Kofi Annan or Jacques Chirac or the prostituted, equally prostituted Gerhard Schroeder, the real blood for oil pimps and prostitutes who constituted the leadership of the anti-war movement in European politics. No, he came to Tony Blair and he came to George Bush. So I give up. Okay, let's have a look at this big stockpile that Colonel Gaddafi's got all this time. It's